All right, mixing things up a little bit here, going back to PowerPoint. I've just got a few slides that you might want to pause and read at a bit more length. So we're having a look at political significance, how you might respond to some of these sorts of questions, and I've got a few little kind of scaffolds that we might use for each area of study. As always, we go straight back to the study design to see how we are supposed to respond to these questions. So when we are establishing political significance, it requires us to develop and use criteria to make a judgment about actors, issues, or crises. So we need to establish a criteria in the introduction. I've said this a million times. It's the most important thing in these questions. To reach a judgment, you can sort of choose one of these. So choose stability or change, choose cause or consequence, choose competing interests and differing perspectives, choose the effectiveness as a response to form your criteria. We're going to get into what that means shortly. As promised, what does it mean to establish a criteria? In this context, it means deciding on the specific measures or tests that you will use to judge how politically significant an event, issue, or action is. You're basically setting out the standard or the rules that you will use to decide whether or not something is highly significant, somewhat, or not significant at all. It's like marking a test. You can give a score. You need to know what you're marking against. How good is it? How bad is it? It's like a criteria sheet in an assessment. For example, you might decide that something is politically significant if it caused major political change or instability, it affected powerful political actors, it produced lasting impacts or policy responses, or it reflected competing interests or perspectives. So you need to choose a criteria like this, and we'll get into some in more detail. In the study design, it says analyze, so political stability and change, cause and consequence could be a potential criteria. So did the event cause major political change or instability? Did it have clear causes and consequences that shaped outcomes? That could be a criteria. Competing interests and differing perspectives. It involved conflict or tension between political actors with different interests or viewpoints. Evaluate the effectiveness of responses. So the responses taken by governments or global actors had lasting or meaningful impacts on the situation. You could also suggest that the scale of an issue is so large that the responses have no impact or struggle to make an impact. That could be evidence of political significance. And then the degree to which interests of political actors were achieved, so the event of an or outcome reflected or challenged the goals of the main political actors, showing whose interests were best served. Now, before we get into a few examples, this is what's written in the study design about how this question might be asked. They're in the key skills of each area of study, and they're written this way in the key skills. So the political significance of weapons of mass destruction and the political significance of armed conflict, that's pretty straightforward. The political significance of China's use of power is how it's written in Area of Study 1, Unit 4, and the political significance of Australia's actions in the region. So they're a little bit more niche. They have a little bit more of a... they're sending you somewhere, those last two, just towards power and towards actions. Let's get into some examples. Sorry, before we get into examples, let's have a look at a question that I got from Annie, which was magnificent. So Annie asked me how to structure a 7-marker using responses as a criterion. So how do we do that? I explained that political significance can be judged by the scale and the intensity of the response to an event. Big issue, big response, small issue, small response. My bad analogy about speeding, it's not a significant response because it's not a significant issue. Me speeding results in a letter arriving in my letterbox. That's not a significant response to a significant issue. If I bombed New Zealand, I'd probably get more than a letter. So the significant response that would come from that reflects the greater political significance of the action. So Annie said, I would like to talk about ICANN and the UN's response as examples to show the political significance using responses. And I said you could do that, and you could write, for example, the international campaign to abolish nuclear weapons is backed by over 600 partner organizations, demonstrating the response to nuclear weapons is global, multi-level, and institutionalized. So the amount of people who have been involved in the response show that it's a significant issue. For weapons of mass destruction, so I just gave you a little taster with that question from Annie, but you might have a thesis statement or a contention that says WMDs are politically significant because they trigger high-intensity, multi-level responses in law, institution, state policy that aim to prevent catastrophe and shape global stability. That's complicated, but it's basically saying the high-intensity and multi-level responses show that it's significant. Some points you can use, look at the different actors that have responded. You can look at the strength and compliance of legal regimes, cost, frequency, severity of sanctions, and whether responses have altered behaviour or civility. So there's some things that you could mention. And some case study prompts. So the NPT and the IAA inspections, the fact that they do that regularly shows it's significant. The level at which the TPNW has been adopted, that could be something that you could use. North Korea nuclear tests and successive sanctions packages, you could say that you could use those as examples of where people have tried to address this issue. So the Ukraine one is nice and easy, I think, in that it's significant because it provoked a system level realignments from alliance enlargement to sanctions blocks and legal actions, reshaping regional and global stability. So this is really basic for a response question because there were so many massive responses by such a wide variety of people. So there are alliance changes in that Ukraine was sort of given pathways into the EU and into NATO. There were General Assembly votes. There were all sorts of different responses that you could talk about with some case study prompts there of like General Assembly emergency sessions, the ICC warrant, all of those things. But the scale of those responses showed us that the Ukraine war is politically significant. Now for China, it's about the significance of China's use of power, and we can talk about how its political significance is seen through the extent of competing interests and contrasting perspectives. So the more actors it draws into conflict, the more consequential its actions become. So if China uses its military power to do something in the South China Sea, it provokes a huge response from others, which means it is politically significant. You can look at those points there, the number and weight of states adjusting strategy, law or posture. So you could look at the Philippines, you could look at America, you could look at Australia. They're all nations that have had to respond to China's use of power. New or strengthened minilateral grouping, so that's things like AUKUS and the Quad. Those sorts of things have been helpful. But really what you're looking at here is reactions to China's actions in the South China Sea and the Belt and Road, and how the extent of those and how threatened people are by those show how China's use of power is incredibly significant. If China, for example, to use the counterpoint, if China had released the Belt and Road strategy and everyone had just gone cool and gone about their day, it wouldn't be significant. But people feel very threatened by this. Australia feels threatened by it. The West feels threatened by it. That's what makes it politically significant. And finally, Australia. So the political significance of Australia's actions in the Indo-Pacific is measured by how effectively it achieves its national interests. So Australia, this question, if you go back to the key skills, remember, is about Australia's actions, and those actions are significant if they help us achieve an interest. So how do we prove that? We assess whether Australia's actions have advanced its interests. So are we more secure than we used to be? Yes, we are. Consider how other states' responses reflect alignment or resistance. So you can look at whether or not states in the region like that we have gone the way that we've gone with the United States. Some have, some haven't. China haven't, obviously. And we can look at, for our case studies, we can look at AUKUS, we can look at the Step Up, and we can look at a little bit of climate diplomacy. We haven't looked much at that, but I think AUKUS, the Quad, and the Step Up will be really good. So basically, has Australia, the political significance of our actions can be measured by how we've achieved our interests, and the extent to which our actions have caused cooperation or caused tension. So our actions are significant if they cause tension. Our actions are not as significant if they are ignored by those around us. I hope that helps.